Okay, so our next speaker is Erin Powell, and she will be talking to us about juvenile lick autotomy for the spinal weapon morph in a New Zealand harvestman.
All right, ready?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Erin Powell, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of my PhD work on New Zealand Harvestmen. And my co-authors are Chrissy Painting, Tony Hickey, Glauco Machado, and Greg Holwell. This work was done at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, but I'm currently in Florida. Lagging a bit. So first, if you're not familiar already with the New Zealand Harvestmen, these guys are the Neopilionids in particular, are an incredibly diverse family found in New Zealand. There's about 28 endemic species, and the females are these lovely little beings with legs that have amazing color diversity. But what is truly spectacular is the males, and the males have these extraordinarily exaggerated chelicerae that they use in male-male contest. So the chelicerae are composed of two segments that fold over with a pinching claw at the end. And previous work on these harvestmen had shown that there are a lot of polymorphisms within species in this family. Essentially, the chelicerae not only differ in size, but they also differ in shape. So for this work, I specifically focused on the species Forsteropsalis pureora. These guys are endemic to New Zealand. They're only found on the North Island. They're sexually dimorphic with the big male chelicerae and the reduced female chelicerae, and they're also sexually dichromatic, with males usually having an orange racing stripe that's very bright and females being a bit more cryptic. They're found in native forests and often associated with streams and caves and sometimes waterfalls. They're also nocturnal, and they have an omnivorous diet. They'll take live prey as well as dead animal matter, and they also will eat plant matter in the lab. So to determine to kind of classify the variation in the chelicera of these of the species, I looked at the linear measurements as well as geometric morphometrics to determine that they have a trimorphism. So here I looked at overall body size, chelicera width, chelicera length, and then because the linear measurements failed to really capture all of the variation that we were seeing in the chelicerae, we went ahead and did geometric morphometrics to quantify the shape by using the landmarking method. So with geometric morphometrics and linear measurements, I found that there are three male morphs. We have the alpha male, which is a fighting male that uses his big chelicerae in male-male contest, a beta male who has longer and more slender chelicerae and is also considered a fighter, and then a tiny small-bodied gamma male that has small chelicerae. So I essentially grouped these into the fighters and the scramblers, and then at the bottom you see a female with her reduced chelicerae. And each of the chelicerae are shown, the second segment is shown so that you can kind of get an idea of the shape differences as well that you can't see in these in situ pictures. So I was curious why and how this species has a weapon trimorphism. How does it occur? Why is it maintained over evolutionary time? And usually when we're thinking about why animals have such variation in their weaponry, we're thinking about whether they're reaching a conditional threshold, that is, whether they're getting enough nutrition during their development to build these big weapons, also potentially having genetic polymorphisms. So this system is really cool as well because the harvestmen are autotomizing their legs. So I had questions as to how leg autotomy might intersect with this weapon polymorphism. So if you're not familiar with autotomy, it basically describes self-shedding of a body part at a predetermined breakage plane, and this is usually seen or thought of to happen in lizards, but it also happens in spiders and leaf-footed bugs, even scorpions and some marine animals. And it depends on the taxa whether they actually grow back these limbs or not. Essentially the first function and the main function of autotomy is to escape a predator. So it may also be used if there's a molting accident in arthropods, that if they get stuck in their molt, they can just go ahead and amputate the limb instead of holding onto it and risking being predated while they're stuck in that shed. There is consequences to autotomy. So even though they escape that predator initially, they usually have to live with either the cost of the energetic cost of regenerating the limb or the tail, or they're having to deal with locomotory costs, or like in the scorpions, they're not even able to eat and defecate for the rest of their lives. So they're definitely dealing with consequences, even though that autotomy is a great strategy to initially escape a predator. So autotomy in harvestmen occurs in the suborder Eupnoi, the long-legged harvestmen. And so harvestmen they have obviously 8 legs, but the second pair are the locomotory legs, and these are longer and held away from the body and not necessarily used for locomotion. They're more used for sensory. And then the first, third, and fourth pairs are used more for locomotion. So harvestmen are unique in that they cannot regenerate legs. So if they've lost a leg in their first or second or third instar, they're never going to grow it back. Which is unique and different to spiders. So within the harvestmen specifically, we know that there's costs for losing those legs that are maintained over the lifetime after they've autotomized, and these include reduced ability to forage, reduced speed and locomotion, reduced ability to perform in intersexual male-male competitions, and also reduced ability to escape future predators. The legs basically act as like a little distraction for the predators once they come off, and that little GIF just shows how they move once they've been autotomized. So for this study, I collected live adult specimens from the field, 86 males, and I've talked a bit about autotomy in the past at the 2019 meeting, but at that time, I was kind of lumping all of the autotomy together, and I had collected these adults and saw that they were missing their legs, but we actually figured out later on that we could tell how old those autotomies were. So whether they had autotomized the legs during their development as juveniles, or whether they had actually recently autotomized them as adults. So by essentially looking at the leg scar, we could tell whether they had autotomized them as adults or as juveniles. And if you look at the figure, you can see that, for instance, in the A panel, the second leg was lost as a juvenile, and the harvestman has molted to adulthood since then. And the coxa is now compressed and tiny. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but this is where I'm looking. So the coxa is compressed and tiny, and you actually start to get like a patch or a scar over it that will even have CD associated with it, and just a good patch of cuticle. Versus if you look at these other legs, this is like a leg that has come off during adulthood, and the trochanter is remaining. So the biggest difference is that they actually lose the trochanter once they molt after an autotomy. So I basically classified legs as either lost during adulthood or during their juvenile development. This is just a picture to show in situ of how a scar on the third leg would look. This harvestman has lost that third leg during development, but he's lost his second leg during adulthood. So looking at overall total autotomy without necessarily dividing them between adult and juvenile, basically it was very common, with 52% of all the males missing at least one leg. Some of the harvestmen were missing up to 4, but that was pretty rare. And leg 2 was always missing the most, regardless of whether they'd lost it during the adult or juvenile stages. So the first thing that I looked at was whether the adults were actually losing legs at differential rates. I hypothesized that maybe if those scramblers were out moving around the environment more, they'd be exposed to predators more, whereas the fighters are staying put and defending a territory, so they might not be as exposed to predators, but I found no evidence for that hypothesis. So there was actually no difference in leg autotomy rate in adults, depending on the male morph. So the next thing I wanted to look at was whether juvenile leg autotomy was actually affecting the final adult morph. So if harvestmen are losing their legs during development, perhaps that leg loss is causing them to fail to reach a conditional threshold. They're not being able to forage enough to get to build those big weapons and large body size, or potentially they're cutting their loss because they effectively know that they're not going to be able to be a big fighter male if they're already missing legs. So if you already molt to an adult missing a leg or two, you're already going to have reduced performance. So perhaps there's some kind of ontogenetic switch physiologically that shifts them towards taking this scrambling gamma alternative reproductive tactic if they've already lost legs during their development. So I found support for this hypothesis. Gamma males had lost significantly more legs while they were developing as juveniles than did alpha and beta fighter males. And leg type also predicted the final morph. So gamma males, the little scrambling guys, had lost more of leg 2 during development than alphas and betas did. So this is kind of some cool first evidence for any animal that shows that leg autotomy can influence final weapon morph in a polymorphic species. The autotomy during development affected final male morph, so the gamma males may be disadvantaged early on in life and have to make the best of a bad job. In some taxa, leg damage can cause a delayed molt or an accelerated molt, or an increase in ecdystroid steroids. So for instance, in cockroaches, leg damage changes the hormonal profile. And if in Harvestmen, we don't know how their weapons are whether they're mediated by growth hormones, but if they're similar to beetles and they're regulated by ecdystroids, then it's possible that leg loss could affect final adult morph if something is switched physiologically. So perhaps it's also just as simple as that they're not able to forage very well anymore. These guys are opportunistic omnivores, so they can catch live prey, but they also can just scavenge on lower quality animal matter or plant matter. So if the guys with their legs fully intact can continue to catch live high quality prey, they may just have much more nutrition to be able to reach that conditional threshold and molt into an alpha or a beta adult male. So I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, Greg Holwell, Glauco Machado, Chrissy Painting, Tony Hickey, my field helpers, Lizanne Gomes, Caitlin Selleck, and Nick Wilmot, the Stubbs family for allowing me to use their land and live on it for my field season, and for the Harvestmen for giving their life and limb to science. And with that, I will take any questions. Let me open my chat box.
Thank you so much, Erin. So if you have any questions, please do write them in the chat. Who wins in a fight, alpha or beta males?
Unfortunately, we don't know. I've only seen fights of like morph pairs, but it seems like, in the like morph pairs, the larger male wins, even if there's just some subtle differences in size. But I haven't been able to get them to fight in captivity very well, so we don't have answers to those questions. I have hypotheses. I think that the shorter, broader alpha male has more power, but the beta male may have some advantages in being able to reach from a distance and kind of keep his distance to protect himself.
Do the fighter males use their chelicera to rip off each other's limbs as they fight?
No, I've never seen them pull off limbs while they're fighting, but I did have that idea at first as well, that potentially they could be autotomizing during contests, but I didn't have any autotomy happen during the few contests that I was able to have happen.
Okay, so we do have another one. Do you think that they don't have the energy to invest in larger chelicera if they have lost limbs during development?
I think that's a good hypothesis, yeah, that they're like compromised with foraging, so they just can't forage enough and have that energetic investment into being a bigger alpha or beta male.
Okay. I actually also had this question. Do the females ever autotomize their legs?
Yeah, females also autotomize at high rates, and I feel bad that I don't have females included in this data set. I did collect data on females, but I actually released all my females, so I couldn't go back and age their scars. But females were missing legs at like total number of legs at about an equal rate as the gamma males. So it would be really interesting to go back and look at that and just see if like females that had lost legs just had an overall smaller body size without even looking at weapon differences. Yeah.
So do you know if there is any expected effect on their the female phenotype if they lose any legs? Will you speculate since you haven't analyzed it?
I would think that, if the hypothesis kind of held that they are foraging better with all their legs, that the females that have autotomized during development would be smaller in total body size, but I don't have that data.
Okay. So in, I just moving too fast. Ontophagous beetles, amputation of the exaggerated horn will result in a minor male, which is paradoxically larger than the major that has the larger testes. Could you speculate on why some minors become larger than majors in certain arthropod species?
So larger in total body size because they no longer have to invest the resources into the horn? Is that the question? I think so. Yeah, so I just expect that they are like partitioning resources into just becoming an overall bigger male. But in in this species that, it might not be advantageous to just be a bigger male. It might just be bigger or better to be a tiny male that scrambles around. So body size might not be as important if they're not even going to fight.
Okay. Are you planning to do on any test where you raise the harvestmen and then you remove the limbs as they're developed to see any impacts?
They're very hard to raise in captivity. They don't do very well. So they live okay in captivity as adults, but actually like getting them to molt and raising them from juveniles is very hard. So it would be a really great experiment to do. And I would love to be able to raise them because I could answer a lot more questions, but right now I don't think it's very feasible.
So when you talk about the scavengers, is it just because of their feeding, or are they also cheaters when it comes to mating?
We don't have like specific data on, whether like some systems are a lot easier to get, data on who got paternity and stuff like that. But we expect that the gammas are scrambling. They're usually like on the move more. And the alpha and betas are more likely to be like staying in a spot, guarding a female or guarding a territory that a female wants. But these guys are very elusive. So it's a lot harder to answer those questions concretely.